And I was just going to let you know. So Dylan is he's our engineering manager and lead architect, kind of rolled up into one. So from a technical standpoint, he's our prime person. I think the other two that may only be missing are Kevin Locke, the overall program manager. He may jump on. I know his schedule's packed, so he may just jump on and then hop back off as he's available. And then Elaine is she's Kevin's she wears a lot of hats. She's Kevin's deputy and she's pseudo, I guess, chief of staff or something. So if she gets the chance, she'll jump on. But Dylan's our primary person, and the recording is going to be for James Rogers, the director of the JSOC. So.
Okay, great. Prior to jumping right in, were there any initial standout questions from what we sent over? And Mark can kind of go over why some things weren't necessarily filled in just because of how our deception is, agentless. And I know that you were probably coming from the mindset of a TiVo. So just wanted to put it out there. If there's any, outstanding questions you want to talk about prior to the demo, we can do that here.
Not for me. Everything looked pretty straightforward in the answers that I saw.
Okay.
And great. Again, anything that I may have missed would just be because we didn't know to ask.
Great. All right. Well, I'm not going to waste any more time. I'll hand it over to Mark, and appreciate you and Dylan joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, guys. So I wasn't involved in the earlier calls, but I got a briefing just to put some of the demo in context. I'm going to give you a little bit of slides, but not to try to be overwhelming with it. More just sort of the logical process of how one would set up deception. And then hopefully that will give more context to the different areas of the actual tool that we'll show you. If you have any questions at any time, just chime in. I'm happy to back up or review anything. If somebody could just confirm that they can see a screen that says how deception works.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was double muted.
No worries. That happens to me too. All right. So maybe the first thing from an engineering perspective is sort of how is it deployed? That's another way of saying how it works. And for us, it's basically there is the management console and the deception server, and then additional components that sort of are really looked at as adding additional visibility or functionality to it. Examples of that would be a sandbox for evaluating files that would be placed on a decoy asset. If it was an FTP server or emulating a SharePoint server or one of those things, if someone actually puts a file in that, we can automatically send it to a sandbox to be evaluated. We also need, obviously, a way to maybe for automated purposes, understand how someone might want to lay out their infrastructure. And some of that is the terrain analysis that we get from the network sensor. And I'm trying to get sorry, I'm a little distracted because there we go. Now my pointer's working. So this is the network sensor here that we connect, and it's part of our other product, part of the whole Elevate family. And it gives you that analysis to understand that, oh, okay, these are the segments that we're going to put our deceptive infrastructure onto, and they already have, say, 12 Active Directory servers, 13 NAS drives, and X number of other products that you would typically find in an IT or OT infrastructure. And by doing that, that feeds into the logic of automating some of the deployment and the making the tools easier for you to use. So that's what the mirror port's here. A trunk port is basically used because it's typically not one subnet, it's multiple VLANs that you want to deploy the breadcrumbs and, the decoys onto. The breadcrumbs don't connect to the trunk. They're actually, the lures is probably more the industry term that you might be familiar with. Lures are placed onto endpoints. Those endpoints are then basically the kind of 3M sticky note that's on the monitor with someone's credentials. All of these things are placed there to help direct threat actors to the decoy assets that are out there. In addition to the decoy assets themselves, responding to tools like an IP scanner and all the rest. So they're still discoverable. And then we, have a connection to the internet for updating terrain information and so on, but also for our rule base and knowledge of the assets, both decoys and real production. So really this first step in setting up a deception, and I'll show that fairly soon, is discovery and identification of the assets. That's what I mentioned or meant by that network sensor. It goes through, it gains the visibility and understanding of what you have, and then provides that as a tool for you deciding. The first stage is what kinds of decoys would you want to create? Because we support both a real OS capability simultaneously with emulated decoys. Emulated decoys would be a little more shallow in that they're just the services. If it's file server, RDP server, the web server, it is not the whole operating system underneath of it. That's what you would have in the real OS, which might be where you would probably want to emulate the gold standard for an organization or an HMI or something that's unique and different. We can also create web servers that look like IoT devices, for instance. Then you're getting to the stage of deploying and testing the decoys, just making sure that everything's getting published to the right networks, make sure that it's the kind of sort of emulated environment that you want on each of the different decoy networks, which are the different subnets in your environment, whether they're DMZs, internal, what have you. Then we go back and the lures, the decoys alone are not enough. We don't want to leave detection to chance, meaning if a threat actor is using certain tools to parse through real endpoints, we want to help that by adding the lures and the breadcrumbs. Many traps are fake credentials and fake data that is being placed on the endpoints, which is really great because there is the ability to attribute that a set of credentials were only placed on one specific real production system, so that if you then see activity by use of those credentials by a threat actor, you can then directly go back and know, okay, that means additional information is that the only way that they would have gotten that information is if they had access to, unbeknownst probably to everybody, a given endpoint. So additional visibility, even without necessarily the decoy being activated or visited and used by a threat actor, you know additionally that this particular endpoint was also accessed by them. This is an example of placing those lures, the different cookies, registry entries, files, canary files, and so on can be placed on these assets. You also have Active Directory deception capabilities, and that is to basically utilize and put into actual real Active Directory infrastructure to add in the fake users that will be employed in the lures that we create, the breadcrumbs that are placed on the units and that are used on those decoy assets. So if someone accesses that you then get obviously the confirmation from that particular decoy asset that someone accessed it and what they did. But also, if they tried to pivot, taking those same credentials that they pulled off the breadcrumbs off of a real endpoint, and then try to access non-deceptive decoys, but actual real production assets, that will generate an error report in Active Directory, and that is additional visibility into a threat actor's activity within your infrastructure by the visibility that we get with the error message. We then can pull in those attributes and know that someone tried to access a production asset using these fake Active Directory credentials that we had created in the system specifically for this. No, they're not given access to real production assets, which is why they're only used for the decoy assets, but still are very useful for identifying access attempts that failed in the case of real assets, which are not decoys. I should probably pause for a second. Any questions so far? No? Okay. So then the last part is the profiling and classification. In addition to deception monitoring egress points to map the communicator channels, command and control, shadow IT tools, network servers, and so, oh, someone's joining. And
sorry, that's me switching to mobile.
Okay, no worries. Cool, you're all set. This is kind of where you go through that process of understanding in understanding the traffic analysis, which is also part of really the TTPs, which is a lot of what a deceptive infrastructure provides you is the TTPs, the understanding and alerts earlier than you would typically identify them with your traditional network security tools. Which is why it's a really great partnering between if you have an NDR product, an endpoint detection response product, and other tools at the firewall level. In many cases, they will not be tripped as early as a deception environment would be to activity by threat actors. So it basically allows us, if you think about sort of the typical framework of an attack, it really starts initially with the recon, and it is in that recon phase that the activity might be below a threshold for other security tools, but is not below that for deception, and we can quickly identify before it moves to the point of data exfiltration, other things that are obviously really bad, and the costs go up to the environment. So that's, I think, it for what I was going to go through from a basic framework of understanding what the tool can provide. And here's a view of the actual tool. On the left-hand side, there's a navigation bar. It's normally collapsed like that, but just for initial use and for the demo purposes, I'm going to leave it up and expanded. You can see that we have several sections to this: investigations and detections, terrain. That was what I was mentioning, the information that's gathered from the network sensor. But right off the bat, under detections, we've got the deceptive activity. And that's this basic screen that's up and gives you a mapping of resources and where they're being accessed from, and the activity on each asset. I can actually see, whoops, I click that, my finger to work. I'm going into a given deceptive asset, and I can look and see how many services, what kinds of services are provided. The deceptive path lets us know kind of how that resource can be accessed and would be accessed. And that's, again, going back to discovering TTPs. We can look in and see that there's a breadcrumb. Unfortunately, on this system, I don't have the ability, because this is our demo system, that I could go into one of the decoys and actually, if it had a web server, access the web page, if it had a file storage capability to either transfer files or fetch files, all of which would be recorded, but they're actually listed, in the system under detections. If I go into alerts, I can see the different types of activity. Here are web connections that are being placed. All of those are sending alerts, and you can see the frequency. If I wanted to go, into any one of them, I can dive in and see what the activity details were, when it happened. You know, that gives me a much better understanding of what activity is going on by threat actors. And I mentioned earlier sort of I didn't say MITRE attack framework, but I did mention an attack framework, and that there are, from the early stages of recon all the way to encryption, data exfiltration, and so on. All of that is represented by the MITRE attack framework that we also employ in the use of our tool. So that often is one that's adopted by a lot of organizations, and we felt that it's a good framework for this. We've got, post that, there's also another section that we've recently added, because we're always trying to innovate and add additional visibility. And we have now a new Active Directory functionality that we added under terrain. You can now see that there's an Active Directory section, the overview. We don't currently have the demo system set up with an Active Directory server yet. So a lot of this is just representative. You don't actually see any issues, but this is the kind of information. We've added in rules specific to activity related to Active Directory. We can, with the population of the users, which is actually, we've started doing that here. You can see some of the Active Directory decoy users that we created. But within the overview here, you've got the capability of understanding and zooming in on those kinds of activities by threat actors, both within the deception environment, and because we are also looking at the network level, if you happen to have our network tool, the two integrate together to give you even greater visibility. And it's called Active Directory Intercept. It's really just bringing capabilities that we had together into a easier GUI visibility for the end user. In addition, if you look down on the left-hand side under deception, these are the different areas. So in that first slide that I showed you about sort of deploying and understanding what we've got, well, that would be what you would get if you clicked on decoys here. It would bring you to this screen, and this represents the decoys that have been created. You can quickly look at a given decoy to see what types of services that it's emulating. I don't think we have a real OS one here on the server, but maybe I'm forgetting that we added it. But all of these are emulated decoys, and they list both the different operating systems, the different services that they're providing. This one has real RDP capability, also publishes a web server, has a shared folder that would be accessed. If we go back up here, we can see that there's an FTP server, SSH. So all of these would be functions, features, and services that we're putting out on the decoy infrastructure, and that we can then collect and monitor activities about each of those. And you can see over here on the right-hand side is basically a mapping of the different operating systems in use. If I click on decoy, it shows which ones are associated with decoys. Same thing here under services. This highlights the services that are represented by the decoys that we've set up. All of what you would have been doing sort of initially in the first, second, and maybe third phases of deploying an infrastructure, and to set that up. So this tool gives you a great deal of sort of detail and visibility into the decoy infrastructure, but also gives you the controls to place and create that decoy infrastructure. In addition to looking at the decoys, which that screen showed, we can look at the different subnets, and you can then look and see what the activity would be in the paths of communication to the different assets. You can go down and look at the container namespace if you are using containers, application breadcrumbs, those are the lures, and here they are and where they were deployed and set up. And you can see the different communications that's gone on in that particular asset. The canary breadcrumbs. If you're familiar, canary decoys is something that we've added into the infrastructure, and you can create various files that have embedded in them information that allows us to track access of that. So if someone comes in and you happen to have a shared folder out there that is one of our decoys or an FTP server, they can grab that file, or even off of, you could even potentially put it on other servers and so on, of real OS, and make it part of that operating system that they would go through and harvest and collect. And then we are able to track the location and utilization of that file through the canary files. So you can also create those. That's an additional capability. We even have network capability. Some of this panel is for basic setup and configuration, but also for enabling ARP communications, for instance, broadcasting decoys on the LANs, enabling MAC spoofing. All of this is setting up, but then there's the man in the middle, shared resource search via multicast, ARP poisoning, and so on. So there's a lot of different levels to it. And then if I go to the Active Directory, this is where you would go in and create that set of user IDs and credentials that would be deployed in your decoy infrastructure, both real OS and emulated decoys. And that gives us that additional integration with your Active Directory system to give us visibility into threat actors accessing those. Any questions so far? No? And Teresa, is this on track with what you think we wanted to show to Chris?
Yeah, I believe so. But I think Chris and Dylan, if you can interject for a second.
Sure.
Be on par with what you're hoping to see, or are we completely missing the mark here?
Nope. For me, no, this is exactly what I was hoping to see, but I'll defer to Dylan from the more technical aspect. To me, this seems more like what the watch floor will be looking for. They'll be our actual operators, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly who's going to be the operators within the console. I feel like it's going to be a mix of watch floor and engineering doing some of it. Maybe, I'm not sure. Do you integrate with cloud services for most of these automation functions, like Azure Active Directory instead of Active Directory, for example?
I mean, using like the Azure Active Directory? Is that what you meant? Sorry. Yes. I just wanted to clarify. So in the cloud infrastructures, if you are deployed in any of the IaaS services like AWS or Azure, you can also deploy, to that infrastructure, the decoy server. But in addition to that, you can integrate with Active Directory across your infrastructure. Maybe the other thing that would be useful is, as you move forward with that infrastructure, if you have a sort of stable, defined environment for end users as well, then that's definitely an area that you would probably want to deploy decoys into, as well as wherever you have servers so that you can see the east-west traffic rather than just simply north-south. And that's a lot of the visibility of that you would get out of this, is being able to track the east-west traffic with inside of each VPC and so on. If that's what you're asking, then the answer is definitely yes.
Yeah, to a point. Does your solution support multi-tenancy? So like we're a managed service provider and like we're supporting DOJ, but we also have external federal customers. Does your solution have the capacity to differentiate between assets deployed for one solution and one for another? For example,
Marty, do you want to try to answer that question?
or would it be like you just have to deploy a new instance for every customer that gets?
Yeah, that's so. In my way of thinking about it, it would be a separate decoy server. It would be the decoy server in each of those tenants' environments would be associated with them. The Active Directory credentials that you're setting up to be used with the lures and the deceptive infrastructure would probably be separated for them. We have a hierarchical management system, so you could actually create a separate management console for each one with a master or top level management interface we call command post that would allow you as a service provider visibility into each of the sort of sub systems of deception. Marty, I see you went off mute.
Yeah, again, I think Mark's covered it. When we start talking about multi-tenant, it really does come down to our architecture and how you are going to be deploying the systems. We have a pretty extensive role-based access capability, so we can have a single system out there separating different communities of interest or different users, and that's been in place for a while. And we've done some enhancements on that to where we could use some networking capabilities like VLAN tags to kind of isolate different users. Their current implementation is actually really a feature and add-on to the potentially what you already have in place. So it'd be an option of potentially just adding some decoy capabilities, decoy servers specifically, to get the increase in functionality. But again, it really does come down to an architectural question. If there's going to be separation, then we would recommend separating devices. And again, it's a component-based solution, and they could be physical pieces of hardware. They could be deployed in some sort of a virtual environment, or they could be, you mentioned Azure. They could be deployed in Azure if that's the goal from that standpoint.
Yeah, I don't have an idea in mind, so I don't necessarily know exactly what the architecture would be. That's why I'm asking.
Sure.
Yeah. Again, I mean, what we typically see is it's built on a sensing technology as well as a decoy capability. The sensing technology allows us to do the asset discovery at a really deep level. If we were just to deploy decoy servers, then the decoy servers can learn a little bit about the assets, but having the sensors out there, it really does enhance that capability. I believe the current implementation, there is sensors already in place. So that function is actually existing today. So when we start talking about assets and learning about assets, that's a function that is there. To get the deception functionality, it's actually just adding a license and then adding the decoy servers to present the deceptive network, and then deciding on how you want to deploy the deceptive network, whether you want to automate that or do it from a manual standpoint, and then start plugging in all the other functions that are available, whether it's the Active Directory piece, it's pushing out breadcrumbs. There's just a whole host of things that potentially could be done.
And Dylan, maybe to go back to the deployment architecture, as Marty was saying, that already in the DOJ infrastructure, there are network sensors and a command post, because those are key components to our network detection response tool, which is already in place and already being used. What you would be adding on would be the decoy server. Now that might be placed in multiple instances in different environments for the different groups within that playing field. And you could also then create that hierarchical structure within the command post to also access them. But you could either add on to each one that's already in place today, or create a sort of mini group that is placed in each virtual environment. So all of our components, the command post, which is the management system, network sensor, and the network decoy server, all of which can be run on hardware or virtualized. And in virtual environments are VMware, AWS, and Azure. So all across all of those environments, you can use any mix and that you want, and whether it's virtual or physical hardware doesn't really affect whether you have access to different features. There's no limitation between them. You would just add more cores, more processes, depending on processors, rather. If you wanted to have more decoys for a given decoy server, and or real OS, as well as the emulated decoys. So that all comes down to, in the end, what makes the most sense for meeting maybe that other goal or design objective, beyond just simply the nuts and bolts of how do we plug this in, but then how do we plug it in and also meet whatever we decide is the requirement for multi-tenancy. So that's why I kind of hesitated at first to answer it, because it really does, as Marty was pointing out, it's totally something that we can do, but it needs to fit within what you guys are thinking of doing in the first place. So I think the short answer is yes. Long-winded way of getting to that. Long-winded is we would just work with you guys to figure out the best way to implement it to meet those needs.
Yeah.
So-
So let me also provide some context into why I ask.
Okay.
So JSOC is the ones, well, JSOC leadership's the one that originally asked us to start this project. But so JSOC engineering provides services to the external federal agencies through shared service, which is a different team. So objectively, there is the concept that we're going to be providing the service to JSOC, or JSOC will be doing it to intro to DOJ, but it'll likely be added to our external catalog to provide it externally. And in that case, it's likely that it would be characterized as a separate instance completely.
Okay. Yeah.
Would
makes
you
sense.
guys be using the current service provider if you were going to extend that service to, say, another group that that you're able to offer? I mean, this reminds me of like the old days when you had the master tick or the major tick, and then people used to contract under you guys. Is that a similar instance type? And the only reason I asked that is we've proposed this capability to the current provider, AT&T. So they have it. It's a question of actually, if you guys contract them to move forward on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how that would work because AT&T kind of does stuff different than, like our group is completely separated than the AT&T group. So there's some minutia in the background that we would have to work out. JSOC leadership would probably just say, so they asked us to do this selection process for general DT processes. And in the proposal, it'll include the minutia of, okay, well, AT&T could just turn it on and deploy it, but it's more complicated than just like making that modification, because there's AT&T pass-through contracts and all that. So I'm not exactly sure how all of that would work.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks for helping me sort of understand. And Marty's got a lot of experience with working with AT&T and the partner, so that should come into play and help us work through those, find a good working solution for you. Did you have more questions, Dylan or Chris?
No,
I do not. Sorry.
I think I'm good for now. I'm sure I'll have more as I sit and digest this. And ultimately, I also need to learn about what infrastructure AT&T. So I know what you've said about what AT&T has.
Right.
Need to talk to them and understand, and also talk to JSOC leadership and find out what their appetite is for leveraging that infrastructure and that service for a function like this. Because we've got asked to do the selection process, which usually includes a POC, but I don't necessarily know how stringent AT&T would be with doing a POC and supporting that from their contract perspective, because I don't know how that would work, right? If they would even support it without some level of funding, or how that works. So it's a big complication in the handling of this that we just need to work through. I'm not concerned about it. I just need to deal with it.
Right.
So you'll get a recording of this presentation. It'll take some time to download, and then I'll make sure to send it off to you and Chris. And you can forward it along to the rest of your teammates. From my end, how can we best kind of support this effort? We want to balance on following up and making sure we're a resource, but not annoying you as you deal with this process.
So first thing, so James Rogers is who's going to be the primary person, the most important person that I can think of that's going to watch this recording. He'll be back in the office next week. Obviously the first couple of days he's going to be under a tsunami of emails, etc. So I'd say probably mid to late next week. Hopefully he'll get a chance to watch this, and I'm sure he'll have a handful of questions. If he brings the questions to me, I'll just forward them straight to you guys. And then we can honestly, once James has taken a look at it, and Dylan can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I will have a better understanding of next steps, to be honest.
Can I ask a quick question? Do you guys
Sure.
have a lab to do a proof of concept?
So the feds have made it clear in other instances that they wanted proof of concepts done on their side. So we have a separate environment, like in IaaS, AWS, that we can spin up resources if we need to for these types of events. But, given the fact that there's AWS co-located infrastructure, or not AWS, AT&T has some level of infrastructure that might support this. There's, we just need to talk to the feds and see what they want to do.
Yeah, again, for their current infrastructure, it would be spinning up a decoy server and basically providing a license to support that decoy server to the current infrastructure. That could be kind of a live POC in their particular environment. If that's not an option, or if you get approval, I just want to leave this on the table. We can potentially provide you the mechanism to spin up a Fidelis solution, with the management console, whatever you need in AWS. A lot of times it's typically hybrid. So you'll have maybe some of the management functionality, cloud-based. But when you get down to protecting enclaves, then we see a lot of times where we're actually putting, sensors and decoy servers in the maybe in the data center enclave or the particular AWS VPC or enclave specific to that customer. So that's just how we approach it from an architectural standpoint. But either way, if again, it's easy if they want to adopt it through their current provider. If they want to do something independent from that standpoint, we're happy to work with you on that and get you whatever you need to be able to demonstrate the capability.
Understood. Yeah, we're just can't talk to what the feds are going to want to do, because it's not just like throwing a POC up there inside of AT&T, because there's AT&T is probably going to want costing to support that. So it's not as simple as just use the AT&T infrastructure or use the AWS for it. It's just there's things that we need to work through on our side. And understood. Thank you for offering.
Yeah, again, I guess what I'm trying to say is we're happy to work through the AT&T channels as well as independent channels to support this effort, because I think it's the capability is pretty it's a again, the whole concept behind deception is pretty powerful, and from a detection standpoint, it really does, it's eye-opening, right? So but it's you almost have to see it to believe it. How's that?
Well, thank you for your time today, Chris and Dylan. Really appreciate you taking an hour or so to consider us further. And I will send you the recording. And if there's any other additional resources that you would like to see for your teammates, please let me know.
Certainly. I appreciate it. Appreciate the demonstration and the information. I think
Yeah,
it's been,
thanks.
very informative. So yeah, I'll reach out next